О культуре нового поколения, о том, как интернет и цифровые технологии меняют восприятие, распространение и потребление культурологического контента, взгляд Google.
So we have a very intimate group today. If there are any questions throughout the presentation, normally with larger presentations it's harder to do, but if there are any questions, please just ask. Thank you again for the very kind invitation. We always take the opportunity to come to a museum whenever we can, especially for an opening like we did with the exhibit earlier this morning, but also just to talk more about our own experiences working at the Cultural Institute and the kinds of things that we're working on and what we see happening in museums. So I actually started work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I was there for 5 years in the web department, working on special collections and with curators on digital projects. And before that I was a computer scientist, a mathematician, but always interested in art and always trying to find ways for the computer science side of me to find a place in the arts. And this was my naive expectation of what the museum was going to be like, that it was going to be natural specimens and portraits and just curators wanting to show everyone about their collections. And honestly, I spent most of my time just looking at museum data, which looks very much more like this. So trying to figure out how to make compelling stories out of just this kind of data, rather than really kind of understanding the historical context and the material you were working with was always the challenge. This, for example, is from the Metropolitan's database of information about American decorative arts. And there's amazing stories in there, but you really have to dig in to find them. And doing that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort on the part of the curators working with the digital side of the web group to really get that content online. So some countries in particular have started these efforts where they're gathering their content into single repositories. And this is the model from New Zealand, for example. We've seen this in the US, in the UK, and now actually increasingly in Russia, where institutions are starting to bring their international material together in one place and then distributing it online to different sources. So in the New Zealand example, they're pulling material from cultural heritage repositories, government institutions, and then linking them all through a single API, a single programming interface, a way for the institutions to share all of that content more broadly. When I was at the Met, what we tried was to pull information from all of these different sources and then try to build a collections website on that information. So pulling that content back into the museum. So we know there's more about our collections that exists online, but how do we actually find that and what do we do with it? What you see on the right is the slide for one of the paintings at the Met. And all there is a small image, along with a little bit of curatorial commentary and some text. The material on the left, it's just that little upper corner that's the same as the Met's material, and everything else was coming from outside sources. So from Flickr, from YouTube, from Wikipedia, from other museums. A lot of other people have things to say about your content when you're a museum. And trying to find that material online was one of the things that I started there, and now I'm doing more at the Cultural Institute. It's a matter of the institutions feeling comfortable enough to start exposing their collections to commentary from third parties. So whether it's sensitive material or something they feel that's a very precious part of their collection, it's few institutions that have really started opening up to this degree. So one of these examples outside of Google, actually we did participate with them, was the digitization of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So again, this is content that wasn't digitized for the longest time, but ultimately, when the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem did finally reopen and the galleries with the Dead Sea Scrolls and did put them online, they found it was over 1 million visitors in the first 12 months that actually came to the website and saw that content, more people than could have been there physically. And right away they started, this is another one of those examples where digitization leads to online access, and in ways that were a little bit unexpected by the institution. The number of countries that they were hoping to reach was just a handful in terms of they thought it would be the usual sort of suspects when it came to digital content online. And we thought the same thing with the Cultural Institute, but we've been seeing a lot of traffic from Brazil, from India, quite a bit from China. So it's the audiences that you don't know necessarily that you're trying to reach that really this digital effort helps the most with. You've got examples from the Royal Ballet that content that they thought was just interesting to them. Once they started putting it online, more of an audience started following that material. So in this case, these were rehearsals and simple sort of practice sessions with the dancers. Things that happen every day, and all they really had to do was point the camera at the dancers and put it live on YouTube, and all of a sudden they had tens of thousands of visitors just watching what would normally be happening in the space. So thinking very differently about the kinds of content that you have. And it extends to the copyrights around the objects themselves. So the Getty, a large institution, in this case in Los Angeles, that has a very classical art collection. Much of their content is out of copyright, but the permissions surrounding the images, especially in the United States, are very restricted. And for the longest time, it was very difficult to have high-resolution images available online. And the Getty was one of the first large institutions to kind of take that step, to start putting large images available online for free for scholarly use and just for visitor use. That kind of, the larger the institution and the more material is out there, the more people are comfortable putting that kind of content there. And they're pushing the boundaries of what copyright really allows. I think another good example would be this 3D project from Harvard and from the pyramids in Giza, so again, the Cultural Authority in Egypt. What they've done is digitize the content, so they use technology to build these 3D models, but use them in educational settings and use them in environments where both scholars and students can kind of examine that material and find new content out about that material. So there are professors that are looking at this content for the longest time that once they see the 3D reconstructions, they're able to make new insights. And again, opening them up in new ways. You've got this juxtaposition series. It's a very simple idea, a very simple interface, a very simple technology. This is again from the Met, where you show layers of paintings. If you have the multispectral imagery, if you have the things that are behind the canvas before it was overpainted, or if there were sketches of that painting available for scanning as well. This interface is just moving the panel left and right, and we have one now on the Cultural Institute that allows you to overlay multiple images. But a very simple thing that lets you start analyzing more deeply because of the availability of the imagery and the technology. Very small things. And honestly, at this point, what we keep running into is even institutions that are closed, that would like to go online or put their material online now just because their physical space is being renovated, or that their galleries are closed for some reason. In this case, you might be familiar, the Van Gogh Museum was closed for renovations for a few years, and they put part of their collections a couple of kilometers away. And instead of shutting their doors entirely, they set up an augmented reality application on your phone. So as you were walking those couple of kilometers from the closed site, so imagine you're a tourist, you're coming to the Van Gogh Museum and it's closed, and then you're walking from one space to the next. You look at your phone and it's telling you stories about Van Gogh, you're seeing the images as you're walking that distance to the new institution. Again, creating an opportunity for a museum experience but outdoors, and one that you wouldn't otherwise have. And really just thinking about how technology might relate to the museum experience. You've got this example from the Tate. What they did is, there's this magic 8-ball. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar. It's this little toy that when you shake, it gives you an answer to a question. And the idea here was that you shook your phone, and based on your location, your interests, the profile that you had on your phone as you filled out the application, it would suggest pieces from the Tate that would be appropriate for your mood, for the weather, for where you happen to be in London, things like that. So what we've tried to do with the Cultural Institute, and I know some of you were here this morning, but I'll go through the Cultural Institute really quickly as well, is to try to build a platform for the institutions to use, to not have to focus on technology, so that it's much more about the content. And every institution keeps running into the same kinds of issues in terms of how do we show images, how do we present mobile content, how do we make our exhibitions last longer online, and that's the kind of thing we've tried to solve here. On the homepage, we try to feature the content that's the newest, the material that's come online most recently, and then also the collections that are coming together, that launch together in groups. We tend to do that, mostly scheduling is around anniversaries, museums have their own exhibition launches and so on, but the new material keeps being added to the site. We're planning our new launch in another couple of weeks with another 50 or so institutions. And there's going to be even more before the end of the year. Additional, I'll talk about Street View in a minute, but not just imagery and collections, but rather also indoor experiences, which I'll show you. But just to give you an idea, currently it's over 300 institutions in 46 countries, large and small institutions, the ones that really anyone can participate. All that is required is that their content is already digitized. So unfortunately, we can't yet go to the institutions and scan there or do photography in the galleries. But beyond that, anyone with a digitized collection can participate. Large and small, even on this list, we have, it's the Al Sabah collection from Kuwait. We've had British Museum join recently, the Eiffel Tower. So again, world-renowned institutions as well as small, unknown museums. And very diverse content as well. We've got not just traditional art museums at this point, but also literary archives, science museums, natural history collections, trying to put together the material from all sorts of different places. And this will be more effective maybe when I do a live demo at the end, but just as an example of a gigapixel. This is one thing that we do for every partner museum, is we photograph in super high resolution one of their objects. Either the ones that are the most kind of, would benefit from detailed study, or the ones that have a lot of intricate detail. So we've done the surfaces of mummy casts, or huge tapestries. We've done, in Sao Paulo, the Museum of Modern Art had a 30-foot graffiti mural, and those kinds of things that we've been trying to scan. In this case, just to give you an idea of the level of zoom, is this is just one. Halfway, it's not even zoomed in all the way, I hope to show you this. But we listen very much to the cultural sector when they try to tell us what it is that we should build. So this is a small tool, again, similar to the Met's juxtapositions tool, but just comparing two images side by side. This is a common technique in our history classes where you're looking at the evolution of an artist over time, or how things have changed in a particular style or genre of painting, for example. In this case, two separate institutions without any coordination from us put both a sketch and the final painting up. So we've got the Design Museum and the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum and the Philadelphia Museum of Art putting up the two different examples. And again, we're finding more and more of these stories where content that otherwise had never been appearing together is now appearing together through the project because all of these institutions are cooperating. And this is just a screenshot of what the indoor street view looks like. I hope I'll be able to pull it up in a little bit just to walk you through the site in more detail. But the idea here is we're using the same street view technology that we use in the cars, just driving down the streets. But it's a trolley, essentially, that someone walks behind, and every few feet it takes a photograph. And then all of those photographs get stitched together into this panoramic presentation. And you're able to walk the galleries without anyone else present. We almost always do it when the museum is closed. So it's an entirely different experience, actually, than being there in the museum. Normally there's people everywhere, and you can never spend as much time as you want in front of the piece that you really love. But here, there's a bit more of that experience. And in some cases, it's the only opportunity to see those museums. So there's museums in India and China where the street view is the only thing we have in terms of, it's the only sense we have of their collections. They don't have an online presence besides what's available through the Cultural Institute. And we've also done cultural heritage sites. This is just one example from a hut from an Arctic expedition. You could walk through the space. There are all sorts of UNESCO World Heritage sites that are also now being included, where the institution's responsible. So We're speaking with the Taj Mahal. We spoke with the Eiffel Tower already, of course, they launched recently, where they're providing street view and also access to their archives so that you can spend more time and learn more about those places. And it's exactly those stories that we're interested in doing more with. So the collections are great, the individual objects are terrific, but it's the context that really matters around these collections. And we've built an exhibition platform on top of those collections, so the institutions are able to upload the material first and then build an exhibition. So for example, the one that we launched today, the narrative kind of flows from left to right across the bottom, and there are these individual templated panels which we make the tools as easy to use for the museums as possible. So we break it up, the tasks, the way their museum would break up the work. So there's one person who's responsible for images, another person responsible for data, and now the curator would be the one composing this exhibit, which is very similar to what you might see around the museum's walls. So it's familiar enough that the curator feels comfortable with composing that content, and still you can click on any one of these panels, these images or these text panels, and get more information about any one of those objects. And we've seen it over and over where, this again from Nelson Mandela, material from the archive that would otherwise be a piece of paper, that would take, again, some scholarly context and curatorial commentary for it to really have meaning, it becomes easier to understand because it's put online in this way. And we've been experimenting a little bit. I mentioned the Eiffel Tower, I hope to show it as well. The exhibit format that we're trying to work with, especially because these are very large images, they're able to zoom into different parts of those images and make overlays over contemporary imagery. So it's not just the way that it looked then, but because we're focusing on historical sites and places that actually exist, we're able to compose these exhibits using that material as well as contemporary photography. And with as much material, you'll remember earlier on, I was talking about all those different sources of information. Well, we've created this environment where now 300 different institutions can have content on a given topic. So we've allowed people to start searching by events, by people, by places, using what Google calls the knowledge graph. When you search in Google, sometimes on the right side, information about an artist or a particular painting appears. All of those are individual kind of units in this knowledge graph. And you're able to search by these. So you try to find the things that are related to the Eiffel Tower, to Nelson Mandela, to so on. All of that material will start showing up now across all of these collections. So you don't have to search in 300 different museums' websites, rather just have to travel to one. And of course, we do have Google+. It might not be the most popular around the world, but we certainly have quite a few followers. At this point, it's around 6 million. We are always fighting for the top spot between Angry Birds, Coldplay, and the Art-Project. So it's always a battle between those three. But there's quite a few people that are interested in finding out more about what the different institutions are doing. And including, we have a series of art talks, which we give the curators a chance to basically tell the stories themselves. So through an online streaming video, the curators themselves, they first ask questions of the audience can ask whatever they'd like. And then one of the staff members from the Cultural Institute moderates these questions. And they're able to have a lecture the way that you would hear at the museum, but open it up across the world so people can comment live, as well as have it be recorded and then transmitted later on the museum's website, and again on our own. There are these user galleries as well. So in terms of interaction with the site, one of the things that we've seen both institutions want to do, but also certainly our users, is start pulling together meaningful collections from across these institutions. So your favorite museum may have 3 works by your favorite artist, but across the world there might be, a dozen more. And being able to pull all those into your own gallery and without having to rely on all of the different institutions is terrific. We have the most Vermeers in one place, for example. There are, I think, 32 Vermeers, and we have, I think, at this point 16, and we may have a few more by the end of the year. And otherwise it would take you years to travel to all of the different galleries to find them all, and they're all in one place in this case. And just to close, I think the magic moments that we're trying to produce at the Cultural Institute. I know it sounds a little silly, the whole idea of magic moments, right? But what we've seen now is that once it's online, and once people know it's there, they start coming up with interesting things to do. So in the first example, it's a Canadian artist by the name of John Rothman. What he was doing is pulling the material from, he was working on a contemporary exhibition looking at 3D virtual spaces. And what he did is he pulled material from the Art Gallery of Ontario where he was putting on his show. And he created virtual environments using those works. So in this case, a Gerhard Richter painting, and then he kind of created an office environment, but using this as the wallpaper for it. And again, the only way he had access was through these images that were available through the Cultural Institute. The second example here is the Morgan Library in New York had a letter from Van Gogh that included an early sketch of the bedroom, and then the actual finished painting was available from the Van Gogh Museum. And again, this is another case where the two pieces just had never been shown together, but now they had additional context. So that you as the art museum, you as the natural history collection, you might think that your collection doesn't relate immediately to someone else's. As soon as we start putting enough of the material together, and as soon as enough of it gets tagged and commented on and annotated semantically, then the associations start becoming clear. That there's connections between all of these collections that otherwise just don't get made. And it's not the work of any one institution anymore to be doing it, but rather the responsibility of either us as the technology people or the audience to make those connections between the pieces. And the last one is a great example from the Getty. Just two paintings that were meant to hang together and never did, in terms of they were brought back together. Yes, they were brought back together through the project. These paintings were, if I'm not mistaken, painted at the same time and then separated and again moved around the world in different ways, but this is how they were intended to be seen. So actually, I'm not sure if I can pull up the website for the demo really quickly, but thank you. And I'll take questions now and then I can show you the site in a little bit, if that's okay. So here's the gigapixel example one more time. So this again is pretty much what the image looks like on most museum websites. This is what you're used to seeing, right? Hello. There we go. So this is the kind of brushstroke level detail that we're talking about. It'll take a second for it to resolve. But you can start seeing in terms of the, excuse me, the very tight detail that we can pull in for each of these images. I mean, just to get a sense of that, actually we'll pull up a few of these other works. Let's see, so this gives you a sense of the different kinds of artwork that we have, and also the street view. Whenever possible, we try to actually visit the institutions and actually show what they look like. So not that just interesting immediately and compelling. Making connections between the physical object and the space, and then back again to the high-resolution image. That should have been to the right one. And then back again with additional details about the object. So always more information, always in as many languages as possible. So in this case, of course, we have Russian, but also as many other interface languages and content languages as we can provide. Just to make it a little easier on myself. So again, for example, here's the indoor street view from the Pushkin. So you can walk through the gallery spaces, find out more information about the works if they actually exist on the site, go to different parts of the museum using the floor plans and so on. Just actually walking through the galleries. We also, again, like I mentioned, have the World Heritage sites. So again, in a very similar way, but in a slightly more prescribed movement pattern, you're able to walk through these spaces. And in this case, on the World Wonders site, the focus is very much on geography rather than the collections themselves. So you've got both the natural wonders as well as historic sites. So just to give an example of some of these. And the idea is that for some of these locations, like let's say the Grand Canyon, for example, there's only so many institutions that can really say things about it. So in the US, it's the National Park Service. The idea would be to then be able to make a connection between the Park Service and then actually that street view material. So you could overlay historical content on top of these historic places. So you'd be able to find those locations. And this is the collection from today. Looking at all of the objects is of course one way to go about it. You can view them in all sorts of different ways. So you've got all the material here that you can click on any one of these and find out more about it. But there's also, of course, these exhibits. And the exhibits in this case, again, it's these left and right narratives. These panels composed by the museum curators, and then each one of these objects that you can click on and find out more about. So then you find out the additional material and additional kind of contextual information whenever it's been provided about that object, that person, the people in the photograph, and so on. And then just to show you an example of what the Eiffel Tower did. So with their exhibits, they focused very much more about the contemporary imagery, and they wanted something a little bit more immersive. So not as much of a scholarly narrative that some of the other exhibits have provided, but something that you can lean back and just spend a little bit more time looking at the images. So here I'm just advancing with the keyboard, much less text, a focus instead on the images themselves, and using the images kind of to tell the story in a different way. And because they're high-resolution images, one of the things we can do is these simple, more maybe cinematic cuts, moving from one vantage point to the next, and focusing on different elements within the paintings and within the portraits and so on. And matching, like I said, that historical imagery, again, with these contemporary street view images. So again, this is the street view that was captured on top of the Eiffel Tower at the different sites. And again, more historic examples along with that present-day footage. And this is navigable the same way that everything else is on the site. So you could actually just spend some more time on navigating to a different panorama and moving from different parts of the image and so on. I was going to show, I think, still maybe one of those, the YouTube art talks, but I can save that for later. If there are any questions, I'd really very much rather have a conversation at this point, especially with the smaller group. If there are any questions, I'd happy to answer. No? I've answered every question? Okay. In terms of presentation formats, like in terms of how they appear side by side? Yeah. I mean, in terms of the content, let me see if the easiest way to go about it here. So this is the compare tool, for example. There's a few other ones. You can view overlaid, which is another method that we have for basically looking at the content. What we can do is we can zoom in these individual, in terms of change the opacity of these individual layers, and then change also the zoom of both, or each individual one. So it will allow for a little bit more kind of immediate comparison between the two different versions. As we can move them around, of course, just to see what's going on, but then there's just the perspective adjustment too. So we've seen this used. It's not yet been uploaded, but there's a few cases where, let me zoom out a little bit. So you can see how this perspective works. It's basically just two layers in space that we're trying to work with. But with 3D works in particular, we're trying to find interesting ways to overlay paintings and sculptures, and to see whether or not we can reapply the skins on top of a work. So there's polychromy, for example, where the sculpture might have lost its paint over time. So many of the marble sculptures that you're familiar with were actually painted at one point. So the idea is whether we can apply these kinds of layers on top, again, using a tool like this. But yeah, this is one of the ways that we're doing interesting kind of juxtapositions. I think, what else is there? Right now, live on the site, I think this is the only one that I can show you. But yeah, certainly. I mean, we're trying different ways of presenting things side by side. Is that what you were asking in terms of, yeah, how to do it? Yeah, very much. I mean, this was a smaller project in terms of just presenting images, but in slightly different ways, so that new connections could be made between them.
Скажите, пожалуйста, возможно, уже существует или предусматривается ли в вашем проекте поддержка для преподавателей, учителей, которые хотели бы использовать ваши материалы для обучения?
Who does a lot of online education and online teaching. So there are art history videos through a group called Smart History. Pull up one that actually has a lot of the content embedded already. That I know has quite a few videos associated with it. So whenever possible, the institutions also provide additional kind of educational content. So in this case, both from Smart History, which produces a lot of these videos, and also speaking with museum educators to try to figure out how to build lesson plans out of the material that's already there. But very much taking guidance from the museum education side. We don't know the content well enough to be able to build these units ourselves, so we always depend on the museum to do it. But very much, I mean, we reach out to the museum education departments to produce the content, and now we're thinking more about how it is that either through user galleries, where people can make their own favorite sets of objects, they can also compose essays, use the content for scholarly purposes. Yeah, absolutely.